Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl is one of those rare books that feels both historically specific and permanently human. It comes out of one of the darkest realities in modern history, Frankl's imprisonment in Nazi concentration camps, and yet it continues to speak far beyond that setting because it asks a question every person must face in one form or another. What makes life worth living when suffering cannot be avoided? Frankl was a psychiatrist, but this is not simply a clinical book. It is part memoir, part philosophical reflection, and part psychological framework. Its emotional force comes from the fact that Frankl is not theorizing from comfort. He is trying to understand what remains possible for a human being under conditions designed to destroy dignity, hope, and personhood. The answer he gives is not sentimental. He does not deny horror. He does not claim that attitude erases suffering. He does not reduce pain to a lesson that can be quickly absorbed. Instead, he argues something more demanding and more enduring, that meaning remains possible even in suffering, and that the deepest freedom a person retains is the freedom to choose how to respond. This is why the book has lasted. It offers neither easy optimism nor total despair. It offers a grave but hopeful vision of human life. Frankl believes that people are not sustained by comfort alone, nor even by survival alone. They're sustained by meaning. If life still asks something of us, then life is still worth answering. That is the doorway into this book, and once you step through it, you begin to see that Frankl is not only writing about the camps. He is writing about grief, fear, responsibility, love, endurance, and the difficult art of remaining inwardly alive when circumstances become brutal or empty. One reason Man's Search for Meaning is so powerful is the way it is built. The first part describes Frankl's experiences in the concentration camps and the psychological changes he observed in prisoners. The second part introduces the essential ideas of logotherapy, his approach to psychotherapy centered on meaning. This structure matters because it prevents the book from becoming either a purely historical account or a purely abstract theory. The memoir gives moral weight to the philosophy, and the philosophy gives interpretive shape to the memoir. Frankl is telling us what he saw, what he suffered, and what he came to understand through the pressure of those conditions. In the first part, we encounter starvation, humiliation, forced labor, uncertainty, loss, and the endless erosion of ordinary human life. But Frankl is attentive not only to events. He is attentive to the soul under pressure. What happens to people when everything familiar is stripped away? What becomes of hope? What forms of inner life survive, and what forms collapse? The second part then steps back and says, here is what those experiences revealed about human beings. Here is why meaning matters so much. Here is why a person can survive more than we might imagine if they have a reason to endure. This movement from witness to philosophy is what makes the book so unforgettable. It does not simply tell us to seek meaning. It shows us why meaning can become the difference between collapse and endurance. It does not merely describe suffering. It interprets suffering without cheapening it. That balance is very difficult to achieve, and Frankl achieves it with remarkable clarity. In the concentration camp chapters, Frankl pays close attention to the inner changes produced by extreme conditions. He describes the first arrival in camp life as a stage of shock. The prisoner enters a world where ordinary expectations no longer apply, where the future becomes radically uncertain, and where the mind struggles to grasp the scale of what has happened. Under those conditions, the self cannot remain untouched. As suffering continues, Frankl observes a second stage, a kind of emotional blunting or apathy. This is not presented as moral failure. It is a psychological adaptation. When pain, fear, and deprivation become constant, the mind dulls itself in order to survive. Sensitivity narrows. Attention contracts. The world shrinks to immediate needs and passing dangers. This is one of Frankl's strengths as a writer. He never reduces the camp experience to inspirational symbolism. He recognizes the degrading pressures that make inner life harder and harder to preserve. Yet, even in that environment, he insists, something remains contested. Not guaranteed. Not easy. But contested. The person is still, in some measure, confronted with the question of who they will be in relation to suffering. The camps attempted to make human beings purely reactive, purely animal, purely broken. Frankl's argument is that they never fully succeeded in every case. Some people still shared bread. Some still comforted others. Some still chose dignity over spiritual surrender. These moments are crucial because they illustrate the book's deepest claim. A human being is not only a creature of conditions. A human being is also a creature capable of response. Conditions matter enormously, but they do not tell the whole story. Frankl saw enough to know that environment can crush, deform, and exhaust. Yet, he also saw that even under those pressures, some trace of moral and spiritual freedom can remain. Perhaps the most widely remembered idea in Man's Search for Meaning is Frankl's claim that everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. This sentence has become famous, but in the context of the book it carries special weight because it was not formed under mild inconvenience. It emerged from a setting of systematic dehumanization. That matters because it prevents us from reading the idea superficially. Frankl is not saying that willpower solves everything. He is not saying suffering is just a matter of perspective. He is saying that there remains some inner space where the self can still relate to suffering, still decide whether to descend into bitterness or to hold on to some form of meaning and dignity. This is a hard claim, and it can sound almost unbearable in its demand. But Frankl means it as a defense of human worth. If the person is only a product of conditions, then the last line of dignity is gone. If the person can still answer life in some way, even in terrible conditions, then the human spirit has not been completely conquered. This freedom is not absolute in the political or material sense. It is often limited, strained, and nearly extinguished. But for Frankl it remains real enough to matter. The book invites the listener to ask what this means in ordinary life. Most of us do not face what Frankl faced. Yet we do face grief, illness, betrayal, fear, limitation, disappointment, and forms of suffering we did not choose. In those moments, we may not control the event, but we are still challenged by the question of response. What will I become in relation to this? What is being asked of me now? That is Frankl's larger point. Freedom is not merely the absence of restraint. It is also the presence of responsibility in the midst of whatever life has given us. The philosophical heart of the book lies in Frankl's conviction that the deepest human drive is the will to meaning. He argues against the idea that human beings are best understood primarily as seekers of pleasure or power. Those motives can be real, but they are not ultimate. Human beings need purpose. They need to feel that their life refers beyond itself, that their suffering is not empty, that their actions answer something significant. Without meaning, life begins to feel hollow, no matter how much comfort surrounds it. Frankl's genius is that he does not treat meaning as an abstract luxury for privileged people. He treats it as a survival necessity. In the camps, he observed that when a prisoner lost all future orientation, all reason to continue, the inner collapse often accelerated. This observation becomes one of the central lessons of the book. A person can bear a great deal if they know what they are bearing it for. But when suffering appears pointless, it becomes heavier, more corrosive, more total. Frankl's account, therefore, gives meaning a psychological seriousness that many modern conversations lack. Meaning is not a decorative idea added after basic needs are met. It is part of what makes endurance possible. This is also why the book remains powerful outside its historical setting. People experience meaninglessness in many forms. A career that feels empty, a grief that seems absurd, a crisis that strips life of coherence, a routine that slowly deadens the soul. Frankl's answer is not to tell people simply to cheer up. It is to insist that life still contains questions, responsibilities, and possibilities that can call the person beyond despair. Meaning may be hidden, but it is not abolished by difficulty. The work of the person is to discover it, not invent it carelessly, and then live in fidelity to it. Frankl's approach becomes especially practical when he explains that meaning can be found in three broad ways. The first is through work or action, through creating something, doing something, serving something, or answering a task that life places before us. This does not mean everyone must achieve public greatness. It means that meaning often appears when we are oriented toward a responsibility outside ourselves. A job done faithfully, a work of art, a duty carried through, a person cared for, a problem confronted honestly. These are not small things. They locate the self within a larger pattern of purpose. The second path to meaning is love. Frankl writes movingly about how the inward presence of a loved person can sustain life even under brutal conditions. Love, for him, is not merely emotional comfort. It is a way of apprehending the deepest essence of another person. Through love, the self is drawn beyond despair into relation. The third path is the attitude one takes toward unavoidable suffering. This is the most difficult and perhaps the most profound. When pain cannot be removed, when loss cannot be reversed, when the future cannot be restored to what it was, then the person may still bear witness to a kind of greatness in the way they suffer. Courage, sacrifice, patience, faithfulness, dignity. These do not eliminate pain, but they can give pain a human form. Taken together, these three paths prevent meaning from becoming vague. Frankl is saying that meaning is encountered in doing, in loving, and in enduring. It is found in the concrete shape of a life answering reality. This is why the book speaks to so many different kinds of readers. Whether someone is building, grieving, caring, enduring, or beginning again, Frankl offers a framework in which meaning remains possible. Of all the book's themes, the role of love may be one of the most quietly moving. In the midst of deprivation, Frankl discovers that a person can still be sustained by inward relation to another. He reflects on his wife not merely as memory, but as living presence in consciousness. Love becomes a way of keeping contact with what is spiritually real when the surrounding world has become obscene and inhuman. This is not sentimental. It is existential. Love reminds the person that reality is not exhausted by brutality. There is something beyond the camp's logic. There is another order of value that violence cannot entirely erase. Frankl's treatment of love also deepens the book's idea of meaning. Meaning is not only found in projects, duties, or intellectual conclusions. It is often found in relation, in devotion, in seeing the full humanity of another person. That matters because suffering tends to isolate. It narrows the world. It makes the self collapse inward toward fear and need. Love interrupts that collapse. It reopens the world. It reminds the sufferer that life is larger than the present torment. For listeners today, this theme remains deeply relevant. In grief, illness, loneliness, or crisis, the memory or presence of love can still steady a person. It can offer a reason to endure, a reason to remain morally awake, a reason not to surrender entirely to despair. Frankl is showing that meaning is often inseparable from relationship. We live not only for abstract purposes, but for people, for responsibility, for fidelity, for bonds that make life answerable. Frankl's treatment of suffering is what makes the book so demanding and so helpful. He does not claim that suffering is automatically meaningful, nor does he glorify pain. He knows too much about suffering to speak carelessly. What he argues is that suffering ceases to be merely suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of sacrifice, courage, or witness. This does not make pain pleasant. It does not undo loss. But it changes the spiritual position of the person in relation to pain. If suffering is only absurd, then it crushes. If suffering can be incorporated into a larger pattern of purpose, then the sufferer may remain inwardly alive. One of Frankl's key insights is that despair is not just pain. Despair is pain without meaning. That formulation helps explain why two people can endure outwardly similar hardships yet respond very differently inwardly. The difference may not lie in toughness alone. It may lie in whether one of them can still say yes to some purpose beyond the pain. This is why the book remains so important for people facing grief, terminal illness, loss of vocation, depression, or long periods of uncertainty. Frankl does not offer a formula for feeling better quickly. He offers a way of asking a better question. Instead of asking only, "Why is this happening to me?" he asks, "What is life asking of me in this? What kind of person can I still be? What responsibility remains? What meaning is still possible?" These are difficult questions, but they are also liberating. They restore agency. They treat the sufferer not as a passive victim of emotion, but as a person still capable of answer. And that answer, however small, becomes the beginning of dignity. The second part of the book presents logotherapy, Frankl's therapeutic model. Unlike some schools of thought that explain human behavior mainly in terms of pleasure, instinct, or conflict, logotherapy starts from the question of meaning. Frankl believes that many forms of despair arise from what he calls an existential vacuum, a sense of emptiness, aimlessness, or inward futility. When people do not know what they are living for, they may drift into boredom, cynicism, depression, or substitute cravings. Logotherapy tries to help the person discover concrete meaning rather than merely analyze symptoms in isolation. That is an important distinction. Frankl does not think therapy should simply make a person more comfortable with meaninglessness. He believes it should help them recover a sense of responsibility toward life. In that sense, his psychology is moral and existential as much as clinical. The therapist is not dictating the patient's meaning, but helping them perceive the specific responsibilities, relationships, or tasks that life places before them. This gives the book a very different tone from some modern self-help. It does not say, "Choose whatever meaning feels good." It says, "Discover the meaning hidden in your actual situation and answer it with seriousness." That seriousness is part of what makes Frankl persuasive. He respects the human person enough to believe that life is asking something real of them. A crucial and often overlooked element of Frankl's thought is that meaning is usually found through responsibility, not through endless self-examination. In ordinary modern life, people often look inward and ask, "What do I feel? What do I want? What fulfills me?" Frankl reverses the direction of attention. He asks, "What does life expect from me now? What task is unfinished? What person depends on me? What duty remains mine?" This shift is profound because it interrupts self-absorption. The self becomes healthier, in Frankl's view, not by making itself the constant center of attention, but by orienting itself towards something beyond the self. This does not mean personal feelings are irrelevant. It means feelings alone are not enough to build a life. Responsibility gives shape to existence. It invites maturity. It prevents suffering from folding into pure self-reference. When someone sees that they are still needed by a person, a work, a cause, a promise, or a future task, life regains direction. This is one reason Frankl's work often feels morally bracing. It asks more of the reader than comfort. It asks them to answer life. That answer may involve service, patience, courage, endurance, or faithful work. Whatever its form, responsibility becomes a path back to meaning because it places the person in relationship to reality rather than in endless preoccupation with mood. Although man's search for meaning emerged from the horrors of the 20th century, its relevance has not diminished. Most readers will never face concentration camps, but many face emptiness, grief, illness, alienation, anxiety, and a culture that often offers stimulation without purpose. Modern life can be materially full and existentially hollow. People can be connected and still lonely, busy and still directionless, successful and still inwardly unsure why they live as they do. Frankl's work speaks directly to that condition because it insists that the deepest issue is not simply how to feel better, but how to live meaningfully. His ideas also matter because they protect human dignity in an age of reduction. When people are explained only as consumers, biological mechanisms, productivity units, or bundles of impulse, something essential is lost. Frankl insists that human beings are answerable, responsible, and oriented toward meaning. That vision is both philosophically rich and psychologically practical. It offers a framework for living that does not deny pain and does not collapse into nihilism. It says that even when life has been wounded, it can still be meaningful. Even when the future is unclear, there may still be a task, a person, a duty, or a way of suffering nobly that gives shape to the present. That is why the book continues to be read across generations. It addresses one of the deepest human fears, that suffering will make life meaningless, and answers with one of the deepest human hopes, that meaning can survive even there. In the end, man's search for meaning leaves us with a vision of human life that is sober, demanding, and deeply hopeful. Frankl does not promise that life will be fair. He does not say suffering will always be explained. He does not pretend that purpose is easy to find. But he does insist that life never stops holding potential meaning and that the human task is to discover what each moment asks of us. That may mean work. It may mean love. It may mean courage in suffering. It may mean accepting limitation without surrendering dignity. The power of the book lies in this shift from self-centered expectation to responsible response. Instead of asking only what we want from life, Frankl asks what life wants from us. That reversal changes the entire emotional and moral landscape. It turns existence into a vocation rather than a demand for satisfaction. It makes even pain potentially answerable. And it grounds human worth not in comfort or success, but in the freedom to choose one's stance toward reality. That is why this book endures. It reminds us that meaning is not a luxury reserved for easy times. It is one of the deepest necessities of the soul. And if we can still answer life, then we are not finished, not defeated, and not without dignity.